There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads, and what a glorious evening. I think it's about 7 p.m. I can't remember, but something like that. And on Thursday evening, going home to the farm this weekend, so I have to get a head start on getting my Friday Reads filmed and edited so that it will reach you on Friday at some point. And it's just beautiful. I was worried it would still be too hot, but there's enough of a breeze, and sitting in the shade in this gorgeous park near my house is filling me with joy. I've had an excellent reading week, more on that later. I've also had an interesting week in other ways. Last Saturday was the Saskatoon Japanese Association meeting, and Kenji and I went. Mum drove us over and we got a ride home from some other people, and we really enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it more than Kenji, actually. I have not been in a room full of Japanese people since I left Tokyo more than 3 years ago, so I loved it. And Kenji enjoyed meeting people. He's not as social of a being as I am, and I'm not as social as I used to be, but I met so many interesting people that I hope that further connections might develop. And Kenji did get a lead, thanks to me. I was asking people as tactfully as possible. I said, yeah, my husband just moved here and he's looking for a job. And got a lead on a restaurant type job for him, and he has since applied for it. And he has received 2 emails today about setting up an interview for next week. So fingers crossed. We also went to the cafe near my old apartment for coffee with Mum yesterday, and I just happened to ask the manager there if they were hiring, and he said yes they were, and he wanted Kenji to bring in a hard copy of his resume, so we went back this morning and did that. And that's an Asian family-owned restaurant, not Japanese, but perhaps Chinese, so that would also be a good working environment for Kenji. So things are starting to happen. I can't remember if I mentioned that Suzanne, my sister, has taken Kenji out driving to get him accustomed to driving on the opposite side of the road to what they do in Japan. And today was the second drive, and I think he's now ready to share some of the driving when we go out to the farm in the weekend, which was the whole point. Because, you know, I'm so useless. I read books to Mum, but I can't drive her around anywhere. Kenji can help with that, so that's great. So yeah, personally, it's been a great week. And reading-wise, it's been extraordinary. And speaking of extraordinary, get a load of this mystery guest. And this week's mystery guest is the American writer, Cynthia Weiner, joining us from the Hudson Valley in New York State. Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Your debut novel, A Gorgeous Excitement, came out to much acclaim in January of this year, and I was put in touch with you by Bookstagram celebrity Bernie Lombardi, who lives in your building.
He does, yes.
So,
and I didn't meet him in my building. I met him on Instagram, or discovered him on Instagram, and then I guess I saw a piece of mail in the lobby or something like that and realized
something about the mailroom, he told me, or he talked about it on his post.
Yes.
So what kind of a neighbor is Bernie? Is he always having loud parties, loud book club meetings, or?
Bernie is the sweetest, loveliest neighbor. He lives, I think, on, I shouldn't say his floor, but he lives not on my floor, but I see him in the lobby once in a while. And then once in a while, he and I have coffee and talk about books and talk about writing. How he reads so much, I do not know. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I think 3 books a week, which
I'm sure in between the two of them, my God, I just can't keep up. But he creates a joyful space online for bookish types like myself. I'm lucky to call him a friend. So tell us about A Gorgeous Excitement. I'll start with a very general question and we'll take it from there.
Sure. It's a novel, and it takes place in the summer of 1986, and it's inspired by an actual crime that took place in New York City on the Upper East Side of Manhattan in the summer of 1986, or at the end of that summer, that became known as the Preppy Murder, which involved a very handsome 19-year-old guy named Robert Chambers who strangled to death a girl, an 18-year-old girl named Jennifer Levin in Central Park at the end of the summer. And I knew him, and I had spent time at the bar that summer where they met and they left from that night. And the story had always stayed with me, but I didn't know how to write it until recently. I tried it as short story. I tried it from many different viewpoints and chronologies and time periods. And At a certain point, I realized whose story it was going to be, a girl who had a crush on him. And then I came upon a story for her with her family and a kind of manic episode that her mother is going through. And then I realized the similarities between those two, the emotional similarities between those stories, and then wrote the novel over many years.
I had heard that it was based on you having lived through that time, but I didn't realize that you actually knew the people at the center
Yes.
of the story. It must have been difficult to write.
It was difficult to write. It was partially writing about somebody else's tragedy, bringing that up again. It's been many years, but the girls who was killed, her family is still alive, and her sister and mother. And also, I didn't want to exploit that in any way. So it took a long time to say, what do I want to say about this story? So that it wasn't just, here's the story, but my feeling about it, my take on it, what it has to do with me, what it had to do with me when I was that age. Also, I have 4 nieces. I don't have children, but I have 4 nieces. And as they grow up, they range in age from, 19 already to, I think, 30 or something. But as they were growing up, as I was writing this book, just seeing attitudes towards women in America, towards teenage girls, what teenage girls still have to navigate all these years later. And I started to realize that the story, as much as it was very difficult to write, felt very urgent to me to write.
This may be a stupid question because I think point of view is always critical to how a novel or a work of fiction gets told, gets narrated. It's obvious, Shawn, but I think in this case, that must have been a really central concern. So tell us about the point of view of this story.
Oh, that's so interesting. I tried to write it first from the point of view, I tried to switch it between 2 characters. I think I was trying to write it from the point of view, and again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but I'll just say I have 2 of the girls in the story. I tried his point of view at a certain point, actually, which was interesting to write, but I just didn't really wind up fitting in the book. But once I got the point of view of, which was similar to me, of an outsider who had, I didn't actually have a crush on him, but I had crushes on a big crush on a friend of his. So an outsider who had a crush on a guy who's really popular and who every other girl likes. And yeah, once I found that point of view, a sort of yearning, unrequited, but getting closer and closer as the book goes on, that was the point of view. And third person, if that's what you mean about in terms of point of view. First person, there were a lot of things that my main character, her name is Nina Jacobs, didn't understand and didn't see about him. So I felt like in first person, unless I was going to start with a whole unreliable narrator, which just wasn't really working for me, I wanted the narrator to kind of know what she didn't know and be able to give foreshadowing, and yet at the same time be able to show her, the character's misunderstanding and justifications for this guy.
And to what degree, and if this is a question you simply don't want to entertain, I would totally understand, although I don't think it's going to make you uncomfortable, but to what degree are you in this novel?
Well, very, very much, very much. I was very much like this girl. I had to push her more in terms of her liking this guy, in terms of her, even her self-consciousness. But I still am very self-conscious, very awkward. I always felt like an outsider. Part of the book has to do with the young woman is Jewish, and which I was and am at that time. And in the 80s, and at least in New York and in America, I'm not sure if in Canada, it was like the preppiness and the waspiness, and Christian men were all at the top of the chain and everybody else was an outsider. And so writing from that was very much like me. And being able to find that also as I went along and make that an important part of the story was helpful because it gave me, again, that perspective and that sort of ability to look at him as an outsider, which turned out in real life, he was an outsider also in the book. So he's masquerading as an insider, and that became part of it also. But yes, very similar. And I came from a family, my mother had some mental issue, bipolar. And so that's part of the book also. And again, it's very much fictionalized, but the seeds of it are true to life and certainly true to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I want to talk about the mother-daughter relationship in a bit, but I'm so curious about this process when a fiction writer gets the germ of the story, or more, it sounds in this case like it was more than the actual germ, but it was very much based on an autobiographical experience. So what's the process like of creating fiction and letting the fiction take on its own kind of autonomous existence. How does that work? Or how did that work in this case for you?
Thus 9 years that it took me, because it took me a really long time. I think that, and I learned this during the course of writing the novel, in short stories, it's a little easier because they're shorter and the character doesn't have to go through as much. In a novel, well, at least for me, I really had to push her much more. Again, had to have her do things I wouldn't have done. I remember there were scenes that I wrote. There's a scene in the book where she's in the hotel room with the guy that she likes, and he starts trashing the hotel room. And I wrote the scene at first for a long time, the way I would have lived it if I were even in that hotel room, which I wasn't, but where I would have sat and watched, and I would have said, no, don't do that. Or I would have been a witness, but not an active participant. And I realized as I was writing, she had, because of the way the book goes, she had to be more active. She had to start trashing the room also, but it took me a long time to get out of myself and see what the character would have to do. And maybe that's part of the difficulty of writing something that's based autobiographically, because as a person, I'm much more an observer than a person who acts. Having to see my own self as a character, in a sense, I had to really see that she was a character and not me. And that did take a while. Another thing I noticed when I was revising was that she wasn't saying very much, that so much was in her head that I would look on the page and I'd say, oh, she doesn't even really have that much dialogue. And so I had to, again, have her speaking out loud more and just much more active than I might be. So it was tricky.
Very interesting. Tell us about the title. I love the title. What on earth does it mean? A gorgeous excitement.
Sure. So the title comes from an essay written by Sigmund Freud called Über Coca. And, oh gosh, no, I can't. The world of cocaine? What does that mean? Everything is cocaine? I forget what the essay title means. But basically, the essay was about he discovered cocaine. He used it a lot. He thought it was wonderful. He recommended it to all of his friends until later he realized it wasn't such a wonder drug. But he did it first, and he described the effect of cocaine as a gorgeous excitement. Those were the words he used, which I remembered as I was writing the novel, when there's a lot of cocaine in the novel, and the young woman meets a new friend who's a much more experienced user of cocaine, who starts getting her to use it. And so the book has to do with that, but it also has to do with, as I said, she has this crush on this guy and it becomes more exciting, and her mother's in a manic episode and that becomes more exciting. And I love the words gorgeous and excitement next to each other because they're weird next to each other. It's dissonant.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I liked what it means, but the whole book is about the under edge of, or the underside of euphoria and excitement, that kind of like the bad parts of it. And so I thought the title had a nice, weird, jangly feeling to it. So that's how.
It sure does. And it's augmented by that photograph of, is it Central Park?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, where there's a swirling blur, a blurry swirl that looks like it might be the way somebody who's on cocaine, not that I have any personal experience, but it looks like a drug-induced kind of hazy view of Central Park. Did you have a hand in the cover illustration?
Not really. There was a different cover at one point. I love this cover. I'm so glad they came up with it. I had a little bit of maybe some of the colors for a little bit of that, but they showed me the picture and I immediately loved it. And I love the little A. I don't know if
I was just gonna, I thought, is this important enough to ask about? But
yeah,
what,
it's A-Train. It's supposed to be like the A-Train, like the subway in New York. Even though, in all honesty, the A-Train doesn't go to the neighborhood that the book is about, but
adjacent enough. It was very deeply based on a chapter of your life, a period of your life. Did the writing of it change your perspective on that period in your life?
Yes, I think so. I think by writing about it and looking back at that time, actually in a couple of ways, it made me realize how much less invincible I was than I believed I was. That was one of the things the book's about also. It's just when you're a teenager and you just think you're invincible. And we all thought we were invincible and we ran around, and parents were not much part of my life when I was growing up. But now looking back, I see how, and I would always say, I would never have gone to the park in the middle of the night. But honestly, I would have if I had been asked, as she did. And I think that it really made me see, yes, how much less safe I was and how much it had nothing to do with me and what I thought was my ability to get out of bad situations. Another thing that's been interesting is that after people read it, particularly old friends of mine who lived through that same time, it turned out that we were, some of us, I don't know if I'd say in danger, but we certainly were in situations that we never really told each other about that were not so wonderful, either with parents or there's a whole part of my novel that has to do with a kind of a very bad behaving doorman. We had doormans in New York. And for other friends of mine were like, I had a weird doorman also, which I never knew. So there were other things too that I learned about that time. And I also, it's funny, I'm older now than my parents were during that time, which is so strange. But I think I have a lot more sympathy for all the parents in the book than I did when I was younger. So yeah, that too.
Speaking of parents, tell us more about the mother-daughter relationship and about Nina's mother.
So Nina's mother has been depressed for most of her or certainly for most of Nina's life. And at the beginning, the book opens in June, a couple of months before her own mother, Frances is the mother's name. So Frances's mother, Nina's grandmother, has recently died, or has died just a couple of months before, plunging Frances, the mother, into an even greater depression than she's ever been in before. Nina, the grandmother, wasn't very nice, so Nina thought her mother would be happy when her mother died, but in fact the mother is even more depressed. So the mother, and this has been a long time thing, and the mother's depression manifests itself in a kind of anger. So she's both depressed but also very angry, and Nina has just a very volatile and difficult relationship with her. But as the first month of the book unfolds, the mother is put onto a new medication, a kind of last-ditch medication before she's going to have to get an ECT that in fact triggers a manic episode, but they don't know it until much later in the book. So suddenly the mother is in a good mood. And it seems that it was from the new medication, and suddenly she's up out of bed and she's dressed and she's wearing lipstick and she wants to go shopping and she's nice. And so a lot of the book is Nina enjoying this new relationship with her mother that she's really never had before. And the father also, and both of them overlooking what starts to be some sort of odd behavior, a lot of rhyming and punning and shopping and strangeness, because they're so happy that the mother feels okay. And I did have a lot of experience with this, as I said, and with friends also, not just with my own family. Just that feeling of when someone who's been depressed for so long suddenly seems to feel better, you almost don't care why. You're just like, you're so happy to see them restored to themselves. Those were hard parts to write, but I felt like I had not read very much about that, and I was really glad to be able to write about that kind of mother-daughter relationship and just that feeling of seeing someone feeling better. Yeah.
Maybe my last question about the novel, before we move on to talk about other things, is, and this may not land at all, but I noticed one blurb describes A Gorgeous Excitement as an expertly written non-coming of age. And then a couple blurbs later, your novel is described as a coming of age story with a ripped from the headlines plot. So what do you think about coming of age or non-coming of age as ways to talk about your novel?
I'm not really sure what non-coming of age means. I didn't really mean to write it as a coming of age, although I see how it is in the sense of it's going from innocence to experience, right? That sort of classic like epiphany coming of age situation. It was labeled in other ways at other times as like a thriller, which I don't think it really is, although you don't really know. You know from the very beginning that someone is going to be killed, but you don't know who, so I guess it's a thriller. But as I said before, it's about that age when you think you're just completely, invincible, which I don't know if you went through, but most people I know went through, where you just, nothing bad, I can do whatever I want to, and then you realize you can't. And part of it was also that sort of admiration of what looks like freedom in another person. And I felt this way very much when I was young. I was so self-conscious. I cared so much about what other people thought of me. And when I thought other people didn't have that, I so wanted that. It seemed like such freedom. But a person who really isn't self-conscious at all and doesn't care what anyone thinks about them is a sociopath, really, in a way. So I think it's that kind of coming of age also, of recognizing that it's not freedom, it's self-destructiveness, and it's narcissism, and it's recklessness. And I guess in that sense, it's a coming of age.
And probably every reader will describe it differently or use different labels or different genre terms to describe their experience of reading it. But it sounds absolutely fascinating. And what are you working on now, Cynthia?
Oh, I'm working on another semi-autobiographical, but hopefully very fictionalized. It will be very fictionalized novel that takes place in kind of the 2015, 16 and flashes back to the 1990s. So it's two storylines and it's about writing envy between writers. It's about regret. It's about who gets to tell whose story.
Pretty darn interesting as well.
So I hope so. And I hope it doesn't take another 9 years. Yeah.
Without getting into anything that's going to pinpoint your location, can you describe what's in the window behind you? It's just a gorgeous view. What are we looking at there?
Oh, so this is a creek. I don't know if you can see the creek, but there's a creek below me. And it's down. Well, I don't know if you can see it. And that's just across the creek. There's these houses, and I think there's a cemetery up there somewhere. And it's just a very small town in the Hudson Valley with a lot of trees and grass. I moved here actually right at the start of COVID. I lived in the city, in Manhattan, my whole life. And something COVID, I was in the park one night and I was having dinner with my friend because you really couldn't be inside with people. And we were outside in the park and I just started noticing like dozens of rats. And I was like, I have to get out. I just have to get out of here. I know. So anyway, but I'm halfway between New York and here at most of the time anyway. I'm back there and the rat situation is under control. But
it's a gorgeous view. It's very inviting. I think you have some books to recommend.
Yes, I do. I have 3 new books. Actually, one of them is less new. I'll start with the less new one. It's relatively new. This is a book called Scorched Grace, a wonderful mystery by Margot Douaihy about a nun in New Orleans who is solving a mystery about a murder that happened in her school and her convent. Fascinating, wonderful character, wonderful first person narrator. Another book that recently came out that I love, it's called The Doorman by Pavone. He was the author of the book, I think, 2 Days in Lisbon
Oh, right. The name's familiar.
This is a wonderful New York City novel about the Upper West Side, a building on the Upper West Side, and a doorman who lives there, works there, and all these very dark things that happen to him and the characters in the building. It's really terrific.
But he's not a villainous doorman like you were talking about.
He is not. No, he's a good doorman. He's a very good doorman and becomes, I won't say involved with the residents, but he knows them. And so the story is from many different points of view. It's a really fun and quite moving novel. And the third one just came out. This is a book called The Stalker, a novel also by Paula Bomer. And this one is about a bad guy who is a stalker in the 90s in New York City. Thrilling, dark, scary, unhinged, fascinating, funny, really wonderful book with an amazing cover too.
That's an amazing cover. Yeah, that's
that I would recommend at the moment.
Huh.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard of 2 of those authors, and I don't think I'd heard of any of the books. So those are very interesting. What a wonderful chat, Cynthia. I hope you'll come back someday.
Oh, it was such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you. I loved your questions. Thank you so much.
So yes, I just clicked with Cynthia Weiner, and even though her novel doesn't necessarily speak to me as being a Shawn book, because she wrote it and she is a Shawn person, I really liked her. I am going to read it and report back when I do. And the fact that she came to my attention because Bernie posted on Instagram, Bernie of Bernie Lombardi, Bookstagram fame, discovered she was his neighbor. You heard Cynthia talk about that. And then I said, would you mind asking her if she'd be a mystery guest? And that's how that all happened. I love when stuff like that happens. So has anybody read this? Anybody planning to read it? I'm curious to hear some reviews of it, but I'm sure all of your reviews of Cynthia Weiner as a mystery guest will be glowing. Just loved her. I've told you in recent Friday Reads that I was working on 2 longer videos and I got them both finished and up this week, so I feel a huge sense of accomplishment there. The first one was about my most anticipated summer 2025 new releases, and that was fun. It was a bit slapdash, which some of the videos that I make where I'm kind of learning about the book as I make the video, that tends to be the way I roll, but I'm going to try to tighten that up a bit because there are about 3 books during the video where I did a deeper level of research on them as I was filming the video and ultimately decided they were not Shawn books at all, or probably not. But I left them all in because, you know, they might be books that you would like. So I got that one posted. And also the Austenacious video. It's Jane Austen July, and for the first time ever, I am participating And I thought it would be really fun, and not only was it fun, but just incredibly elucidating, to bring my local friend, although she's an international friend now because she divides her time between Saskatoon and Italy, Kathy James Cavan. She was my mystery guest a few weeks back. And the wonderful Roz of Scallydanting About the Books, and her descendant, her younger sister, Tilly of Tilly Shelf. The three of them, all Jane Austenites, together to have a conflab on Jane Austen, not as an official part of Jane Austen July, but in conjunction with that, and that chat went up, and it turned out fabulously. So I think you'd really enjoy that one if you get the chance. Emma is the group read for this year's Jane in July readathon, and I'll have just a little bit more to say about that later, but they do talk at length about Emma, but a whole bunch of other Austen books and Austen stuff, so it's wonderful. I'm very pleased with how that turned out. Oh, and by the way, I mention this every few videos because I don't want you to forget, and I want anybody who might be new to know that I have bookmarks that I specially designed for sale. And when I first launched this product line a few months ago, it sold very well, but I haven't had any new sales for a while, and it's the only way I can afford to buy any new books in the coming months is if I sell a few bookmarks. But they're lovely bookmarks, people love them. Here's the pictures of what they look like and all the details about how to buy, and there's even a little video in the show notes if you want to look into them further. But yeah, there's my little advertisement for this video. Okay, I have finished 2 books, I believe that's correct, and I'm going to be checking in on a bunch, and I'll be starting one. And I just realized I forgot to bring one of the 2 books I finished, but that's all right. I'll start with that one. That was the Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Prowler, and that was volume 5. And I read that to Mary Jean, and I love every volume more than the last one. My mom is inhaling them, so she's already read volume 6 and 7, and I think she's just starting 8. And that's all that's available, but 9 is coming soon, and I saw a blog posting. Joe Smith sent me a link to it, where the author, Beth Prowler, said she's working on volume 9, so volume 9 won't be out anytime real soon, but she's working on volume 9 and also volumes 14 and 15, just because the scenes kind of come to her, and those later scenes aren't going to show up until volumes 14 or 15, which gives me a lot of hope that this series is not going to finish anytime soon. It's delightful. Emma M. Lyon, I guess you'd call it neo-Victorian, but it's set in 1883, and in the ways that it's not historically accurate, or it seems like really an unconventional young lady for the time. She's not noble, but she has noble friends, and she's just on the uppermost crust of the middle class, I guess. She has really unconventional friendships with men, and that is fascinating, and it's really moving, and it's, as somebody who can be a bit of a stickler for historical accuracy or whatever you want to call it, it just rings true. The things that she's getting away with that I think you would never find in a Dickens novel or any Victorian era novel set in 1883, but she is just a remarkable protagonist. Very funny, but also with each volume increasingly dark themes. She lost her fiancé a few years back, and her live-in tenant experienced trauma similar to the war, was it the Crimean War, Afghanistan War, that killed her fiancé. I think I've got that right. And just a lot of stuff that is deepening the story. The cast of characters is wonderful. Everybody loves it. I have now got Kathy James Cavan onto it, and she's inhaling them as well. So yeah, that has been a big success. That was a very cute young man that just walked by with headphones, so I can say that, even though he's still very close to me. Gave me a big smile and a wave. The other one that I finished, which was even more of a success, and I love the Emma M. Lyon series, so that was a big success. Absolutely. I think it's, in terms of publishing, it's the penultimate novel by the British writer Douglas Bruton, Hope Never Knew Horizon, which came out in 2024. Douglas is incredibly prolific, and his books are short, but he just tends to write them in like 5 days, and then they come out 5 months later. I just can't keep up with the output of Douglas Bruton, but With or Without Angels. The first one I read, it's not the first one he wrote, but the first one I read about 3 years ago, With or Without Angels, all about art and aging and death and legacy and creativity. Oh my God, I loved it so much. And then last year, Lindy and I read Blue Postcards, and I loved that one very much, not as much as With or Without Angels. Didn't have quite the impact for me, but it's a very fine novel also about art. And now Hope Never Knew Horizon. So this is about hope, and it is the most unsentimental and powerful treatment of hope as a literary theme that I've ever read. And as is Douglas's I never know how to pronounce that, but you know what I'm saying. So, very much like Blue Postcards, Hope Never Knew Horizon is a tripartite story. There's 3 narratives, and he threads those 3 narratives together, and they're all based on historical fact, as was Blue Postcards. And so that is part of his creative literary modus operandi that's fascinating. Lindy and I taped a full-length interview with Douglas about Hope Never Knew Horizon, and that will be coming to my channel not soon. I've got a huge backlog of videos, but before the end of the year sometime is the best I can say. Fascinating. What a fascinating man. What a fascinating and really beautiful book this was. So the 3 storylines, one begins in Wexford County, which in rural Ireland, when a whale washes up in 1891, and it's the story of the people that discovered it, and it's an imagination of those people. The name of the guy who discovered it is recorded in history, but Douglas Bruton has spun a lovely fleshed him out fictionally, memorably, and he discovers a beached whale, and he wants to make money, so he sells all the meat and stuff, but then he makes this big deal through a middleman. I believe it was through an intermediary to the Natural History Museum, and they transport the skeleton to London. And all the details of that are richly narrated, but then they don't have the space to reconstruct the skeleton for about 40 years, and it's left in boxes. And people that are connected to the storage and caretaking of those bones report that the bones are kind of singing the way when you hold up a seashell to your ear, you hear the sea, that there's kind of this thing. And that part has just pulled me so deep into this story. So we follow the progress of that whale skeleton right up into near the present day. So for about more than 100 years. And lots of issues of conservation, environmental, endangered species, and finding meaning. The second one is Emily Dickinson. The protagonist is one of the domestic maids at the Dickinson household in 1850, and she's a bit of a snoop, and she gets wind of what she seems, in a certainly curiously, I would say anachronistically, non-homophobic way, love affair happening between Miss Emily and Emily's brother's fiancée, Susan Huntington. There's those letters, a lot of them survive. Douglas researched them and then constructed this narrative. And of course, hope is the thing with feathers. And let me say it more explicitly, that the hopefulness of the whale story is that the research and the care with which these bones were reassembled and moved to a larger museum later on, and the interest over time as we enter a more contemporary era, all the things about wanting to preserve and understand whales and keep them from being slaughtered and whatnot, the conservation thing, that's the hopefulness. And then in this one, again, Emily's famous poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers, but the title comes from a letter, or nobody can quite decide if it's a poem or a letter she sent to Susan Huntington. A promise is firmer than a hope, although it does not hold so much. Hope never knew horizon. Beautiful. That section also powerful, moving, like I say, not a stitch of sentimentality. And finally, the third one, London, 1880. A young woman, Ada Alice Pullen, who ends up taking on a nom de plume. What was it? I've forgotten it. But she was a famous stage actress. I guess they used the word actress in those days. And model. And Frederick Leighton paints pictures of her. She is his model. And some of those pictures are very famous. And she introduces him to George Bernard Shaw. And this Frederick Leighton guy, he had, knowing that she was an actress and that she was taking on roles where her working class diction was not appropriate, he would train her for correct pronunciation. And then it's a historical fact that he introduced her to George Bernard Shaw, so maybe that's the germ of that famous novel that became a movie. No, it wasn't a novel. It was a play, I think. Anywho, and then she kind of gets poached, but in a way that's genteel and there's no resentment, by another famous artist named G.F. Watt. And he paints, she is the model for this famous painting, which is called Hope. And it's a very compelling painting. This was a postcard Douglas sent to me with the book. And all about the meaning of this kind of forlorn-looking, distressed woman in a blindfold, embodying hope, and how that picture has spoken to viewers over the centuries since it was first exhibited. And there is there's a sorcery in the way these three narratives build a sense of hopefulness. Maybe it was at the end of COVID and at whatever point it was in the Trumpian era, Douglas said he wanted to write something about hope. And this just vibrates with it in a way that you can't find a sentimental word and it's going to change you utterly. It sure did me. I just think this is Douglas Bruton should be famous. And if I was famous, I'd make him famous. But I'm this much famous, so I'm going to do all I can to get the word out that Douglas Bruton is one of the most important writers writing today. And this was a masterpiece. All right, I'm going to check in on a few books I've started. And I've had a lovely reading week, but I don't feel that I've made enough progress with any of these books that I've been enjoying reading so much to give you an in-depth check-in on any of them. But the first two that I mentioned 2 weeks ago, I will try to do so. This Canadian novella, The Prowler by Kristjana Gunnars. This is for the Novella Reading Project with Barb Howard. She assigned me this, and it's fascinating. It's postmodern. It's a very self-conscious novel, and it's so well done based on the first, there's no page numbers, but I've read the first 25 sections, and I'm thinking that's about 15 or 20 pages of a very small, tiny book. I love it. I love the writing. I think the best thing to do is give you a sample of the writing. It was originally published in 1989. I think it's out of print, unfortunately. Here's a couple sections, 3 and 4, just to give you a sense of the kind of pomo reflectiveness of it. 3. It is a relief not to be writing a story, not to be imprisoned by character and setting, by plot, development, 19th century mannerisms. A relief not to be writing a poem, scanning lines, insisting on imagery, handicapped by tone. A relief just to be writing. 4. I do not want to be clever, to make myself laugh. I do not feel clever. If I laugh at myself, it is because I have nothing to say, and I am full of love. Because nothing I can say says anything. There will be mere words. It is because I'm full of love that my words have no meaning. I'll read the next one because it's very short. 5. It is a book marked by its ordinariness, that knows there can be nothing extraordinary in a life, in a language. And then just the first line of section 6. Yet the story intrudes. So she's kind of bullshitting herself, but it's in such a beautifully written way that I don't mind, because then the story emerges of her family. I don't know how completely autobiographical it is, but she was born in Iceland and lives in Canada. Came to America first and then Canada. I think she might be around 70 or 80 now. I think she was born in 1948, but don't quote me on that. But then the autobiographical details come through and they're so compelling. So she grew up very poor in Iceland, and really the family lived on relief packages from America back in the day when America gave a shit about people anywhere in the world. And it seems like her father is Danish, but he's considered to be Icelandic he's called a white Inuit, but I'm not clear. I think he might be full Danish rather than Icelandic. And her mother is from Hungary, but they're an Icelandic family, and apparently the story goes back and forth between Iceland and Canada. It's a puzzle. It's very literary. And if you like fragmented narrative, Lindy, I'm looking at you. You've probably read this, have you? I think you'll enjoy it. I certainly am. And it's short enough that I don't know if I'd want to read a 500-page novel that kind of jumps around and has lots of navel-gazy writing things in it. But for 100 and well, however many pages it is, about less than 200, I'm here for it. And the Prowler, I peeked at the back. I don't like to do that, but I peeked at the back. It says, Kristjana Gunnars offers us the Prowler inside every one of us. The textual prowlers of writer and reader rethreading / de-threading themselves and each other. So it's very interesting. Who knows what I'll end up making of it once all is said and done, but very interesting. I only did a wee check-in on this one. I want to say more about it. Oh, the Brave Music by Dorothy Evelyn Smith. Oh, it's good. It's as good as any novel I have read by a man or a woman published in the UK in the 1940s, or, in the first half of the century. It's really good. Why is it not being taught at universities? It's as good, if not better, than any of the crap people study from this period. I'm so glad it's been brought back into print. And I'm going to be unless it goes off the rails. I'm only about a fifth of the way through it, but Mom and I are just loving it. Dorothy Evelyn Smith. What a mystery this is that she is not better known. I know one other book of hers has been brought back into print by Furrowed Middlebrow. It's got 2 women's names in it, like Anne and Jane or something. I'll put the cover up. I certainly want to get to that one, and I know Mum will want me to read it to her. And as I told you before, so very briefly, it's a coming-of-age story, and Ruan is the daughter of a kind of grumpy, stern Methodist priest, and his wife was not Methodist. She was Anglican and not particularly religious, and she is not very happy. And she is not a very good mother in the sense that she loves her oldest daughter because she's the pretty one. Ruan, the middle child, is not pretty, and Ruan says she's not pretty. All the other characters say about Ruan to her face she's not pretty compared to her older sister. So there's a whole bunch of family dynamics. The most compelling thing that makes this an adult novel, it is not for children at all. And it's done so well that if you have an allergy to children in fiction, which I struggled with for years, and it's still something that can bother me if it's not done the way I like it, but it's a retrospective narrator. We don't get foreshadowing of what's going to happen later in her life, but it's the adult protagonist telling us the story. And so one of the observations she made where I realized this was going to be a complex, fascinating story is that she describes her father as feeling so guilty that in the early days of his courtship and marriage with the protagonist's mother, she was such a beautiful woman, that he ranked her body, loving her body, above loving God. And he's never forgiven himself, and that's not the place he's in when we meet him in the story, and their marriage seems quite dead. Wow, I love that kind of stuff. So just to say, it's wonderful. I'm making a judgment early, and sometimes I regret that. I don't think I'm gonna. I've heard nothing but really positive reviews of this one, and I'm so glad I got my new glasses, because when I look at it in the last few years, I'd say, oh, that print's too tiny. I can't read that. I'll have to get the ebook. But with my new glasses, I have no trouble reading it. So, and Mom is just loving it. Very excited to be finally reading Oh, the Brave Music by Dorothy Evelyn Smith. And another one that I didn't get into at all until this week is Though the Bodies Fall by Noel O'Regan, and it's starting out fascinatingly. Oh my God, I've only read 30 pages. I'm not going to do another check-in until I'm done, but I've read enough to just tell you, oh, it's so well written, it's fascinating, and I wonder how much of it's based on some true story, but it's about this family living in Kerry Head in Ireland. I don't remember where that is in Kerry. In Ireland, I do know that the author was raised in County Kerry, so it must be County Kerry. It's at the edge of a headland, so it's right near the edge of a cliff, and people for generations have used that as this place as a suicide spot. This property was bought by the protagonist, who's a fairly young man, Michael, by his grandparents, and they got all wrapped up in trying to save people and coax them from taking their own lives. And then his parents continued that work. Just by accident of geography, that's where they were, but it shaped the family. And his parents, I think they're now dead. They certainly don't live there. Sometimes those details, they don't stick, but they're not living in the house. He's living in the house alone, and it seems like he's just moved back to that house. It was empty for a while, and he wants to continue this. And there's something kind of depressive about him, and I'm imagining, the more I read, that it depressed them, but it also gave their lives meaning. It's a really curious premise for a book, and I wonder how much, if it might be... I've read things, news articles or whatever, about people that lived near a place where people would jump and that they got involved. I know I've read true life stories about that, and this has a ring of some kind of truth to it. And this part of Ireland, the sport is hurling. And I'm learning about hurling. And they had a girls hurling team that one of his sisters was in. And one of the main characters of the town is Brenda Jr. So there's interesting gender stuff, because have you ever heard of a woman being called Junior? It's such a male patriarchal thing, isn't it? But her mother was the store owner in the little village, and she was a fierce human rights activist as much as she could in a little village, but she was very progressive and left-wing, and she was always protesting and evangelizing about social justice issues back in the time when nobody was really doing that, or, it was kind of, especially in rural Ireland, and she was much loved. And she was Brenda, and now her daughter has the store, and she's Brenda, so everybody calls her Junior. I love that. That's just fascinating little things. And the last thing I'll say about it is, I don't know if Michael's gay, and anybody who's watching, don't spoil it for me, but it opens in a scene where he has just finished coaxing a young man not to kill himself. And then he watches him walk away and watches which way he's going to go. So he'd been in the house. And then the way it's described, it's like, I read it a second time, and I'm maybe less sure about this than I was when I read it at the beginning for the first time, but it seems like they had sex, or that he's getting back into his clothes, but maybe he's just changing his clothes. And then there's a curious scene that I thought maybe wasn't necessary, but I have to finish the novel and then reassess that, where he's standing alone in the house, and it seems like he's taking a leak, but no, he's doing something a little bit more pleasurable. And it's like, okay, why is that there? Am I saying more about myself, that I see sex and everything? But it seems like that if it's not just me, that there's an overlap of sexuality and this. It's not religious. These people are not religious, or at least it hasn't come out yet that they are. But this, if I can use the word ministering in a secular way, that this project that they feel they're here, they might as well try to help. And sexuality, even if none of that comes to fruition, it's absolutely fascinating. Really enjoying how it's getting started. Because I finished reading the Emmett Lyon book, To Mary Jean, is another one by David Carpenter, who you probably know I'm doing a series of interviews with, and who has become, I would say, a friend. He was my prof in the 90s, and I've cultivated a connection with him more recently. And this is his 2008 short novel, Niceman Cometh, which just cracks me up. Of course, it's a play on Iceman Cometh, and this is Niceman Cometh. And I feel like I'm not far enough into it, even though I am 50 pages into it, and it's not very long, to really explain what it's all about. But it is the first work of fiction, I'm pretty sure, that I've read by David Carpenter that seems like it's going to be set exclusively in Saskatoon. And so it's fascinating for that reason. There's others where Saskatoon has been a setting for part of the story, and that may end up being true here. It doesn't matter, but I'm always curious to read about my city in fiction. And David Carpenter has lived here since about 1970s and was conceived here. His parents lived here. She got pregnant, but they had moved, I think, to Edmonton by the time he was born. But he was conceived here. He loves to tell people that. There's a bunch of characters, men and women. Some of them are losers. There's one guy called Jerry that I don't much like, and I'm hoping I don't have to be in his head too often. But so far, I think two of the main characters I'll tell you about. Ricky, he's a late-night DJ, and so he's a little bit famous. His voice is famous. And he's single, and he's got a bunch of girlfriends and ex-girlfriends, and his love life is very much part of the story. And then there was an older woman. She wasn't that old when she died. She died very near the beginning of the novel, but she had a house that she carved up kind of into apartment-style suites, and that's how she kind of made a living, was just by renting out. Her part of the house was, she was a bit of a hoarder, and so the descriptions of the house and the smell of the house, it's not a turn off to read, but she's an odd character and not well. And so she dies fairly near the start of the novel, and it's her son Jerry, that's foster son, I guess, who's just creepy, and I don't really like reading about him. I'm not selling it because I'm not sure what it is yet, what the story is. But the characters, other than that one guy, and that's fine not to like a character. I don't think I was meant to like him. But the characters are interesting. Don't know where it's going. And the writing is lovely. There's humor, beautiful nature scenes, and a really interesting picture of Saskatoon in the 1970s. So that's a very preliminary check-in on that. I'm reading that to Mary Jean, like I said. And then very briefly, because I'm hardly enough into them, but I have started Emma by Jane Austen, and I'm loving it. I'm doing it on audio with the book in my lap. I will never do this just on audio. The writing is just too rich. I want to have that peak experience of reading it while hearing Juliet Stevenson read it to me. I have no memory of it. I've always remembered it was my favorite Jane Austen, and I've read now 20 pages, and I'll continue with that. And I've made a very bare start, but also feel very positive about the beginning of this Indian novel, Amitav Ghosh, Sea of Poppies. This is going to be a buddy read. I haven't asked her permission to name her, but she is one of my patrons, and she won a giveaway book last year. I sent it to her. It didn't arrive. I felt terrible about it. I offered to send her another one, but she lives in a part of the world where the postal service is not very reliable, and she said, absolutely don't. It's probably get lost again. So I didn't, but I still felt she's not on the tier where she gets buddy reads automatically with me. But I said, I'd like to make up for the book going astray by doing a buddy read. And so she looked through my book videos and chose a short list. And the one that I picked out of the short list she made, it was Sea of Poppies. We're going to discuss it very late this year. I can read it at a luxuriant pace. But it is about a poppy farmer. She's the poppy farmer, and he works at a factory. And so far I've met her and her young daughter. Diti is the mom. She's a young mom, and she's working herself to the, she's just to scrape by with the poppy farm, and the yield is poor right now. She's worried about that. Diti's one mark in her life is that she has light gray eyes, which were extremely rare in this part of India, and so she's kind of taunted by it through her childhood, and people think that there's something not right about her and supernaturally kind of stay away from her type of thing. And she's so relieved that her beautiful young daughter Kabutri has dark eyes like everybody else in this part of the country. But the fascinating thing is it's set in the around the time of the 19th century opium wars, and she has a vision. She has never been to the sea. It's set in northern Bihar. I should have said that earlier. I've only read 10 pages, but I read enough to know that it comes out that she has seen a vision of a ship that was just coming into one of the ocean ports that day. Editing Shawn here, I forgot to finish that thought. So, she has this vision, and then within the first 10 pages we learn that despite her living hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, that exact ship did come into the port that day, and that sets off, I think, a really deep strand of the story. And so then plot ensues. It's really intriguing, but very bare start. All right, and I said last week that I felt I was biting off more than I could chew, and I have to tell you, when I finished the Friday reads, I was so exhausted, I thought, I really, really have bitten off more than I can chew. But this week, I haven't had any reading deadlines, other than I have one lovely buddy read with Joe Smith that I have a certain amount to read. But other than that, I could read at my own pace, and now I feel, no, I haven't bitten off more than I can chew. That may change, but there's one more book I'm going to be starting, and it's for Pseudo Buddy Read with Alina, one of my top-tier patrons. I'm so glad that she suggested we buddy read this one, because I've had it for probably about a year. Been dying to get to it, and the only way I get to books is if I can read them to Mom or Mary Jean or do a buddy read. Story of my life. It's a happy problem. An Irish novel from 2024 with the most beautiful cover ever, The Coast Road by Alan Murrin. Oh, I can't wait to read this. I think I'm going to do this as an audio-text combo. Opens in 1994 on the coast of Ireland. One of the main characters is a writer bohemian woman named Colette, who left her husband and sons to pursue a relationship with a married man in Dublin. So that sounds absolutely fabulous. More on that a little later. Well, that is my Friday Reads, and it's way too long, but I had lots to tell you, so I hope you enjoyed parts of it, at least. Thanks for watching.